Thanks everyone for joining this DABCC Live webinar. I'm really excited today. We're going to talk about troubleshooting Citrix XenApp and XenDesktop and show you a really great product, a new technology that's going to help you with this. I'm thoroughly excited. As I always like to say, my favorite part about these webinars is I get to be an attendee also. So you know, what more can I say? I'm really looking forward to this, and I hope you guys are too. As always, please use the questions piece to go to webinar to ask your questions, and I'll get these answered within the webinar. We do have a hard stop at the top of the hour, which is a little bit rare for us, but we do. So please ask your questions early on versus later, or we might not get to them. If we don't get to them, we'll definitely get them answered. We'll just send you responses directly. So don't worry about that. On that note, I have like I said earlier, I have a couple guys with me, Steve and Raja. And they're going to give you, first we're going to start with just a basic company overview, you know, what we're doing, product overview, things like that. And then we're going to turn this puppy over to Raja and really get deep and show you the demo. And this is where guys ask questions and Raja can answer them and show it to you within the demo too. Oh, why we do it here. So this is going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be as much fun as you guys make it with your questions too. So please do that. Steve, are you ready? It's all yours, buddy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate for the wonderful introduction, and also to the audience and everyone that's attending today. Our goal is here to do nothing short of blowing everyone's mind here. So if we do anything else other than that, we will be failing. So we're also going to ask you guys for some participation. So we can jump to the agenda slide here, just to give a quick overview of how we're going to cover this again. So we want to really make a very simple goal here, which is to share with you, Doug, and the audience, a solution to troubleshooting XenApp and XenDesktop. So we're going to briefly talk about Tricerat, show you where we fit in the marketplace. We'll talk about the problems that we solve, and then spend most of the time in the demo and the live software. We'll finish up with Q&A, so please, as Doug mentioned, fill that box up as they come up during the presentation. But before we do, in order to get the most out of this session, I'd like you all to ask yourselves a few questions first. So we'd like you to take a minute. We can jump to the next slide here. We'd like you to take a minute to finish these sentences for us. So ask yourself, I could solve a lot of my problems today if only my monitoring and troubleshooting tools could fill in the blank. And in the past 12 months, these problems have cost me what? Fill in the blank. So we're asking, think for a minute about this. Think of a situation that you've been in recently or currently in that could have been avoided or resolved. Think about how these problems may have impacted you and your organization. So take a minute, write it down. You can feel free to type it in the chat box. We're also going to be doing a poll later, right, Doug? So we'll put that question box up again for later. So for now, think about that, and we'll move on. So let me briefly tell you about Tricerat. And for those that haven't heard of us, I want to tell you just a little bit about us first. You see, at Tricerat, we believe that IT admins should have more time to spend on strategic and meaningful company initiatives rather than the mundane tasks and becoming proactive versus reactive. And our mission at Tricerat is to simplify the lives of IT admins by automating the everyday routine tasks associated with managing a trouble-free end-user experience. So we accomplish this by delivering dependable and easy-to-use software tools and personalized world-class support and service. Some of you may know us for our powerful printing software, Screwdrivers, that has changed the way people printing in Citrix or terminal services in VDI. Now we're also going after monitoring. So let's move on to the next slide, and I'll go into, as you all may know, there are many monitoring solutions out there, and it can be a very crowded and confusing market space for someone trying to find a solution. By the marketing language, all the solutions sound very similar. So through many conversations with our customers and partners, it became clear to us that there's a gap in the marketplace. Today, we want to show you where we fit and the types of problems that we solve. So on one side, you have legacy vendors on the right side, like HP OpenView, CA Unicenter, or EG Innovations, who have one or more of these following characteristics. They're high cost to implement and to maintain. They have limited functionality for virtual desktops, virtual server monitoring, or at best can just check the box. And they're difficult to use, most requiring certification and other specific programming skills. The others on the left are element specific, like Veeam, VM Turbo, SolarWinds, or Comtrade, with characteristics like a narrow focus. They can be less expensive, easier to use, but need multiple products to get the job done. And most don't coexist and aren't scalable. So Simplify Monitoring fills this gap and allows you to get proactive by being easy to deploy with predetermined thresholds, alerting, and remediation. And we act as the eyes and ears for XenApp and XenDesktop and NetScaler with out-of-the-box dashboards, charts, reports based on best practices. You have one product for complete visibility and coexistence, a low cost too, so you don't need a full-time employee or specific certifications or programming required. Now, the context of these conversations that we've had with customers and partners that showed us this gap in very strong ways, it sounds kind of like this. So end users have a difficult time articulating. You can jump to the next slide. Now, end users have a difficult time articulating what's wrong, but when they call the help desk, they're saying things like Citrix is slow. There's a lag when I type and click. My applications keep getting stuck. Or last week, everything was fine, and now I can't get to my application. Now, they're calling into the help desk, and the admins that we talked to as well, which we can go on the next slide, the sysadmins are telling us that they feel like they're part of the XenApp defense team. And we hear things like, XenApp isn't the problem, but I have no proof. I have no way of troubleshooting these crashes. I need a better visibility into ICA latency, and I need to get proactive. So that's what we're hearing. So let's get into a little bit more of how we can help these situations. And you can go into slide 8. So here's what we monitor specifically. With built-in to Simplify Monitoring, the performance intelligence for XenApp and XenDesktop, the solution enables you to know exactly what to monitor throughout the infrastructure to keep XenApp and XenDesktop running smoothly. So with no programming being necessary, Simplify Monitoring is going to provide you instant access. And if you start at the bottom left, XenApp and XenDesktop performance and XenApp desktop user experience performance, detailed session data, as well as the ability to correlate that with the supporting infrastructure. So essentially, once you connect Simplify Monitoring to your XenApp and XenDesktop environment, the solution begins to pull these metrics together automatically. Then it can pipe that information into the Simplify Monitoring console that can also plug into XenCenter or vCenter or other solutions. And on that point, I want to reiterate one other thing with enterprise coexistence. And Raj, you can jump to the next slide. As you know, there isn't one size fits all when it comes to monitoring. And with Simplify Monitoring, we're aware of this. And it's not an either-or choice. So the solution coexists in enterprise IT with other major investments in tools, which monitor the infrastructure or certain elements of the environment, like HP OpenView, CA Unicenter, SCOM, or Tivoli from IBM. And these lack that deep support for the virtual servers and virtual desktops. So for enterprises, Simplify Monitoring fills that gap left by the other tools and acts as the eyes and ears for XenDesktop and virtual servers in the enterprise, and then shares that information with the enterprise frameworks or analytics solutions, network monitoring tools, and legacy monitoring solutions so that the VDI and virtual server environment can be monitored easily and in a central location with a familiar interface that they've already invested in. Now, for the small or mid-sized market and those businesses who need a comprehensive monitoring solution, Simplify Monitoring also has the ability to not only proactively monitor the XenApp and XenDesktop environment, but the entire supporting physical and virtual infrastructure as well. Okay, next slide. So before we get into the demo, and that's what we're ready for, we'll take a real-time look at the solution, and we'll be able to see how we can get to root cause, provide the objective evidence, and remediate things quickly, as well as schedule future fix actions that Raj will take us through. And we'd like to hear a little bit from you. So, Doug, do you want to run that poll now?
You bet. So let's go ahead and run the first poll, which is complaints from end users. I've heard these complaints for decades, right? And so are you guys still hearing this? If so, I made this multiple choice. Let us know what you're seeing here. Please, please vote. Give you a couple seconds here. Percent voted. You're almost 50% voted. Come on, guys. We're almost there. 72%. How do I stop the vote? Okay, I'm going to close it down. Raja?
Yep, I'm here.
I'm
going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm going to go ahead and do the second poll real quick. So I'll just give you guys the results. I don't know if you can see those. It's a 69% of the people, it's taking too long for my applications. 96 say Citrix is slow. That amazes me that that's still that way after so many years. 42% lag every time, 46% the application. There we go. Just amazing, amazing results. Let's go ahead and do poll number 2. So please go ahead and vote. Problems administrators experience. So that's problems you guys are experiencing. And the network team one, I like that. That's those guys. That's not my problem, it's yours.
Right.
Although nowadays it's the network team's almost the Citrix team in well, it depends upon your environment, I guess. Okay. Let's go ahead and close the poll. You guys have voted. And then Raja, go ahead and share your screen again, please. And there we go. 35% problems with my servers or VMs, but where and what? 32%. Only 16% of what's changed. That's good. And network team 16%. That's good too. We got synergy within our environment. So let's, Raja, go ahead and let's do the demo. Before we do that, though, I have a couple questions from the audience that really relate to some of the stuff that Steve talked about around, what do you guys work with and what do you support? So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you those right now, and then,
yeah,
and then we'll get to the demo. Sound good?
Sure.
So does this work with monitoring licensing?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do monitor licensing right now, especially some of the conditions that take place when a server is unlicensed and it tries to check back in. And then in terms of trending out licensing, we actually have a couple of new reports that we're going to be featuring in the next couple of weeks. I'm actually not going to just trend out license utilization, but break that down by XenApps and desktop. You can overlay it how you want to and really track and trend that information the way you want to see it.
Perfect, perfect. How does your app calculate IOPS? And IOPS as in what is measuring, because there is a few ways.
Yep, that's a great question. So we actually calculate IOPS in 2 different ways. One of the ways in which we actually pull information from the environment is through our API integrations. And so we'll pull back data regarding storage IOPS from a storage perspective, from a VM perspective, from a host perspective. But then we also fit into that by also being able to drill down and on a per application basis, being able to provide IOPS per application. So you can see, for example, which application is using the most IOPS.
Oh, that's cool. That is cool.
Yep.
So I'm sorry?
No, I was just going to say, we're going to dig into that in just a little bit too.
Absolutely. That's what I like. So this is the fun part. So do you guys support F5?
We do support F5. One of the cool things with Simplify Monitor is that We have a number of different methodologies for interrogating the environment. So in terms of F5, we can actually pull back data using syslog and SNMP to give you an indication of issues that are taking place, events that are transpiring.
Perfect. And then compatible with XenDesktop 7, 7.1?
Yes, it is.
Absolutely. So those are my questions for you. Let's get to it.
Absolutely, great. So what we're looking at right now is a Simplify Monitoring screen, which is one of our main performance graphs page. And what we actually do from here, Doug, is actually have an opportunity to pull back together information from across the entire infrastructure. And I mentioned a little bit just a few seconds ago that we had the ability to do that from across the environment. And so if we take a look at the top left-hand side, we've got a bunch of different dashboards up here. What this is actually representing is a couple of the pre-configured dashboards that we have on this screen, because we can actually load these pre-configured dashboards for different objects out there, as well as customized dashboards too. Now, one of the cool things that we can do is actually integrate directly into VMware and Xen Server using their specific API set. So, for example, when 6.2 came out for Xen Server, we actually added support for all of those new metrics that they now offer, like the IOPS information, the I/O wait times, disk latency, some of those metrics. And then, of course, we're able to do that for VMware too. And then we also have, so that's completely agentless, our API integration there. Now, we do have an agent for some of our monitoring that we do, and so our XenApp and XenDesktop monitoring is actually takes place through our agent. Now, this agent's not like other agents. It's about 1.5 megabytes in size, uses about 0.1% of CPU utilization. And so we use that to facilitate our API integration to XenApp and XenDesktop. Now, when we have those agents out there into your VDI sessions, XenApp servers, that actually gives us and provides our visibility down to that application layer inside the OS. And then we can actually analyze a number of key metrics in real time and then hold on to that data historically on the Simplify Monitor server side, as well as indicate problems as they're happening as the moment that they take place. So that's coming as a result of our agent out there monitoring that layer inside of the guest layer. And that's both Windows and Linux. So not just monitoring the XenApp servers, but any of the apps and resources they might be accessing that are going to be impacting that performance. And then we also support SNMP and syslog. So we can give you some quick visibility in terms of bandwidth utilization on the network side and show you exactly what's going on out there. Now, where that's really important is when we start looking at some of the dashboards and graphs that we have, we can certainly show you CPU utilization and memory utilization, but being able to actually put that against the server load is actually important, or adding in things like ICA latency or some of these other conditions that we have down here, so that what you can then track and trend on this display is you can see at a high level if there's a change in utilization that's taking place, or more importantly, if that change in utilization, like this jump in CPU utilization, is reflected back against server load or high ICA latency, or if we're seeing a change in a XenApp parameter or XenApp or XenDesktop farm parameter, and then how the environment is reacting to that in terms of available resources. So in terms of providing a macro view, this grid provides a great way to kind of give you a quick shot to exactly what's going on and see what's happening out there. Now, Doug, I was actually going to dive more specifically into the XenApp and XenDesktop monitoring we provide and how we can drill into sessions and what's taking place and some use cases around that and how you can really leverage Simplify Monitor to really narrow those conditions down. Before I did you have any questions or anything like that about what I brought up so far?
Yeah, well, I do have a question here. Does the XenDesktop agent need to be installed on each VM or just a desktop controller?
So in order to bring back the session-based data, we actually deploy that out to the DDC. Now, when we deploy our agent onto those VDI sessions, we can get some really cool pieces of information. That actually allows us to actually drill into different sessions that are out there, what's going on it, and actually find out what's actually taking place. And so we can do a lot more with that agent deployed out there. And that being said, the agent can actually be deployed into like a gold image or your image templates. You don't need to do anything like taking out the GUID or doing anything with the logon script to facilitate that agent being placed there. The agent, that 1.5 megabyte agent, will stay self-contained within itself, and it enables you to actually drill down inside those sessions and find out what's taking place, who's actually inside there, what's going on inside of that session, so you can find out, like we're seeing here, some of what's actually taking place.
Oh, very cool. I like that. I like that. Do you provide a way to deploy the agent?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can actually, we actually have a couple different ways of doing it. We can actually push it out there from the Simplify Monitoring side. So when we do that, we'll actually just simply ask for your credentials just to execute the deployment process. We'll push it out there real quickly, and we can do that not just at one location, but if you have multiple sites, we can actually deploy them into remote sites and across multiple domains and different authentication methodologies. And then we also have a way you can actually pull down the agent. Of course, there's a manual agent method for bringing it down. But a real simple way of actually getting an agent out there, like say you're building or working on your image template and you want to get the image installed, well, you just need to point to the Simplify Monitor server and then go to a path, and it'll pop up, and it'll just bring down the agent right there. So you can do that from really any location, really fast and easy.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, sounds good. I'll let you continue along. And then, guys, don't forget, keep your questions coming.
Okay. So what I'm actually going to do, I moved over to the XenApp and XenDesktop session display. And the whole purpose of this screen is to enable us to provide visibility to the different sessions that are transpiring out there and kind of break down the entire environment. And a lot of our customers are starting to play with XenDesktop more. They've, of course, had their XenApp environments. They've got 4.5, they've got 5.0. And some of the challenges that they have is, well, how do I navigate between these different farms and see all this information? And so from this one display, you can really quickly dive between XenApp sessions and XenDesktop sessions and your XenApp servers and seeing at a high level what's the health of my entire environment and start drilling into conditions just by coming to one place. And just with a couple clicks, we can actually move between them. And so one of the common conditions that we hear from customers is that they have a user that calls up saying that, oh, my session's running slow. And so if they came into the XenApp session display like this, they can really quickly see a couple key pieces of information. Now, well, for one thing, they can see all the sessions that are taking place, but they can also see the ICA latency. And so if the customer had complained or the end user was complaining about performance issues and saying, well, it didn't really happen today, I'm actually talking about something that happened yesterday or 2 weeks ago, or you know what, this has actually happened a lot. I know I haven't told you about it. This actually happens a lot. And you're like, well, wait a minute, I need some values that are talking about every single day. Is it multiple times during the day? Well, from this view, we can actually bring down all of that data. And so I can go back a couple months and real quickly bring back performance information from all those different periods of time, all the different users, where they were signing in from, what they were executing, what the actual latency is that they were seeing out there for those different sessions. So if they're complaining about performance, and a quick way to find out if it was an ICA latency condition or about how its actually experience was for them is looking at ICA latency, and we have all that information right here. Really quickly, we can pick it up. And we can go cross-farm on this. You'll notice that we have a couple different farms showing up here, and even across multiple versions. So if you've got a 4.5 farm, a legacy farm, you're transitioning over to 6.5, or you're at 5.0, and you kind of have to keep some old apps around you're trying to move them through the different ranks back up to 6.5, hopefully, if you can. You can see all those different users and what they're experiencing. So if I drill back down to one specific user here, and let's, you know what, I always pick on James, but I'll pick on myself today. If I do that and I take a peek at what I've been experiencing for the last couple of times, I can see that right here. And so I'm looking at just myself across all the different farms I'm accessing and exactly what's going on. And so I can see it real quick and fast and have some actual metrics and data say, okay, this user, I can see that I have been having some issues. I can see the last, especially the historical sessions, the last IC latency that they experienced, and then the average over the course of that session that they were actually going through and what they were actually dealing with. I can also see, of course, any active sessions that are out there and what the current ICA latency is and how that session has been persisting over that period of time. And then if I want to find out what's going inside of there, I was working with a customer, Doug, where they were trying to identify for this end user. They weren't very tech savvy. It's actually a healthcare customer in a hospital. They had a nurse in one of the stations on another building running into problems, and it wasn't starting off bad, but over time it's just getting worse and worse and worse, and they didn't know where to even start. So we brought back down a screen like this to kind of get an idea what was the session looking like over all the times that they were connecting, and it wasn't looking too bad. All the session was really looking very similar to this. And so what they did is we actually took a look at the session, said, all right, let's start with the XenApp server. What's going on here? And so we clicked on the server itself and brought down all the sessions that were taking place and what was happening inside of it. Now, one of the things that we can actually bring up here is see, it's not just this current session. We can see and sort this out and say, okay, well, we can see that Firefox, and specifically a plugin for Firefox, is using up a ton of resources, 60% of CPU utilization. And it's chewing that up and spreading a lot of information back to disk. I can see the IOPS hit, and I can also see the number of handles, too. This is important information because I need to see exactly what this is looking like. And now I can find out this is actually what's going on in this user session. And if this wasn't the case, if we couldn't go down here and say, oh, well, clearly Firefox is using a ton of resources, I can click on this button at the bottom and see not just for this user, but any other users that are on here and what that resource utilization is looking like. So now I'm getting a quick peek as to what that's actually, what the performance is actually showing as. I can also see, for example, here that I'm seeing one of my other Citrix services, the audio channels in play as well. So I'm seeing a lot of I/O throughput taking place on the audio channel too. So that's telling me a couple other things too. I can see, for example, and again, we can sort this from this column too, that that Firefox, and there's a lot of I/O utilization on the audio side of things. So they're streaming something across audio. Give me a great perspective to see exactly what's going on.
That's cool.
Yep. And so this information then can be updated, and you can bring back new information. I just clicked on refresh, and now I've got fresh data points here, so I can see what's happening. You can see the time there. It's just catching up with what the time it is now. And now I can see some more information. How have things changed? Well, CPU utilization has now gone up even more. I can still see all my I/O throughput and exactly what's happening. This gives me a good perspective as to what's going on. Now I can go to that user and say, can you maybe try turning off YouTube and see how that changes things? And let's see if that makes a better experience. That gives you great insight. That gives you a way, something that you can use to go back to management and say, listen, well, I've got users using YouTube. This is causing issues here. Now, if that wasn't the case, and it wasn't just that simple to see that type of a condition, and it wasn't the use case I started with, the next thing that we did is we were able to actually go to the XenApp server itself and say, okay, nothing going on right now, but maybe there's been some things happening in terms of CPU memory utilization, provisioning of resources, that I need to get a better grasp of what's happening. And so if I click on the actual chart icon here, it's going to bring down the current utilization, how that's been changing over time, my disk throughput, how much activity has been on this system, how the drive space availability is, my write cache low, the network utilization too. So if there's something that's hammering in terms of network utilization, I can see that, get that quick perspective. And then the latency back to the system. Am I seeing any high latency periods, or is it saying it well within margins like it is right now? All this information I can pull back across to find out what's going on in that system where the user actually is. And now I can flip over from a server view and say, okay, well, all this stuff looks okay, but what's my server load looking like right now? Am I getting close to like 9,000 or 10,000 with the full server load? I can see all that and trace that back from here. Now, what we did with that user is we were able to take these screen grabs. We can actually export this data back off as a report, send it off to Excel if I needed to, so I can take a look at it, and certainly print this off so I can start putting together my case for management that, hey, it's not my fault. It's nothing on my end. And then the last thing we were able to do from here is actually go to the reporting side, and there's a set of reports that we have that actually go to the actual users. We put them on the client side as well as on the server side. And this actual collection set, what it's actually looking for is all the performance conditions around what's going on at that server level as well as at that workstation level. So it's doing an actual analysis of all these different metrics and conditions. And so it's looking at all these different metrics and saying, and coming back with a report that it will bold out and say, hey, you know what? You're doing way too much context switching. You've got some CPU, you've got a CPU and performance bottleneck. In this case with this user, what was actually taking place is we used this report as well, was analyzing the connections, because at this nurse's station, they were moving from Windows XP to Windows 7. Obviously, April's around the corner, and a lot of these large organizations still have users on Windows XP. Well, on that Windows XP box, we were seeing the number of failures staying pretty much just straightforward, and the connection closure staying pretty much even, but then the number of connections being established going through the roof. And as it was going up through the roof, their performance on their end, they were telling us timestamps, and we were talking to them, and we were seeing it filling out at the same exact time. Nothing to do with XenApp. It wasn't XenApp's fault. What we were able to see from the client side, these types of connection issues, and it bolded out and said, hey, you've got a connection issue here, and it's going beyond the scope of what can actually take place. So these reports work hand in hand with the different views that we provide to be able to drill down into these types of XenApp and XenDesktop session views and trend out what's going on, provide reporting on to what are your users doing that are out there, how many unique applications are being launched, all that type of data. So being able to pull this data information together will help you not just identify the condition, but also prove at the same time it's not XenApp's fault, if that's the case.
You got it. You got it.
Yep.
Hey, I have a few questions for you. Ready to take them?
Sure. Yeah,
Okay. Here's a question I wanted to ask you, and we've actually had two people ask somewhat the same question, and that is, the architecture question, right? All this is up and running, and this looks all fine and dandy. Did this take you a month to do? Because it's yours. You know how to do it. And then what's the back end look like? Their specific question is, what's the database on the back end? Is it SQL? Is it, what is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll start with the database question. I'll move right over to the architecture and how long it took to get set up. But just a simple answer is, it takes usually about an hour to get everything up and going because we automate a lot of that for you. So there's no reason to make it very manual because you don't have to. We've actually done a lot of stuff to help you out there. Now, on the back end of things, we have SQL. We usually put information to a SQL database when we go into production, and that helps us keep all this information. Now, you can choose how much information you want to keep. And actually, it's not this information that uses a lot of the resources. It's actually event log information that holds a lot of data, because one of the things that Simplify Monitoring can do is identify event log conditions and actually parse those in real time. So if you've got these types of IMA conditions occurring and the service is failing out, we can pull that information back and give that information to you, especially in PBS where things will crash and go down, you lose the logs. Well, we can actually choose how we're keeping information inside of that database. And so we can actually tailor this information down. You can choose how long you want to keep it. Do you want to keep it for a year? Do you want to keep it for 6 months? You can pick, and you can pick it by metric. And so with event log information, we'll generally have an option to actually archive that data off so you can keep your database size small. So you're not talking about a 200 gigabyte database. You're talking about maybe for several thousand VMs and XenApp servers, maybe about 20 gigabytes. So it's a lot more consumable, a lot more manageable.
Perfect. Great answer. See, is this only for XenDesktop, XenApp, or can they use this on a regular desktop?
They can absolutely use it on a regular desktop. We have a lot of customers that do. And naturally, it's important for those people in a XenApp environment and those in a non-XenApp environment that you look at not just the specific element, the specific application you want to monitor, but those pieces that impact it too. That's what really enables you to manage it and monitor effectively, because you can't see XenApp or XenDesktop or a simple desktop without a relying architecture. So you can deploy it out to monitor just a simple desktop, see what's happening out there. If they have some specialty application, line of business app out there that you need to monitor, with Simplify Monitoring, you can do that too.
Perfect, perfect. Could you monitor the latency between XenApp servers and the publishing servers?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we can see when we go to one of the servers out there is the actual latency conditions. Now, this can be adjusted and defined as you want to. So if you want to see the latency from one server to another server, you can absolutely go ahead and do so. So I can point this instead to show you the latency between not just this server, but back to the RFP server.
Very cool. Very cool. Is there an alert system built in? I think you've talked about that a little bit already. Like SMS. Oh, like SMS, email, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll do an email integration. We'll do SMS text. We can actually pass this information off to other solutions. We have a couple of customers that do some interesting things with that functionality, and that's that they'll actually take the information, actually pass it forward using syslog. So they can actually archive the events and conditions that are taking place too. So we can forward events as SNMP traps, syslog messages. That's how we do some of our coexistence actually, like with SCOM and SolarWinds and other technology. We can pass information on to them or receive information from it using SNMP and syslog.
Interesting. Next question. I like this one. Heaven forbid, the gentleman says, heaven forbid that users are connected to XenDesktop via RDP rather than ICA. Is there visibility into RDP latency versus ICA latency?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
And I might have to get back to you on an answer for that. I'll definitely log that down. I do know, for instance, that we can see if the connection is RDP instead of ICA, for instance.
Yep.
And so we'll pick up that kind of information. And we'll even show you back on the actual system itself what the actual connection type is to that system at that point in time. So if it is an RDP connection, we'll show you which user it is, etc. Now, if we can show the actual RDP latency, that's actually, yeah, actually we can. We have a way of actually defining different protocols and the connection, and you can define that and set that up. And so you can see the actual latencies on that basis. There's a way to do a user-defined connection latency.
Perfect, perfect. And I have two questions on cost. And that's one of the things that impresses me. So I was going to save it to last, but I have two people now asking. So I'll throw it at you.
Sure.
Can you talk a bit about cost?
Sure. So generally, its cost is on a per. It depends on what it is that we're monitoring. For the virtual environment, just kind of working right down on the screen that we're at right now. Well, we license a host, the virtual host, on a host basis. And then from here, what it will actually do is will allow you to monitor all the different VMs that are on these virtual hosts. Now, if you want to deploy an agent out to one of the VMs that are on those hosts, we actually can do so. We can we can actually deploy that agent on there, and it's actually at a reduced cost. If it's a XenApp server, whether it's physical or virtual, it's $400 per XenApp server, and that provides in that XenApp API integration. It's $400 per virtual host for that matter too. We provide that data as well. Our devices are licensed on a per device basis. So you're not paying per element, and the same thing on the host side. You're not paying this per CPU or per core. It's just on a per host. And on the device side, if it's a network device, a switch, or firewall, we do that on a per device basis, and that's about $95 per device. So that helps you see exactly the bandwidth monitoring, et cetera, as well. So you can bring all that data back together in this one screen.
Perfect. And then my last question for you before we get on is, you know, I'm using Edge Site or thinking about, well, it's a Citrix product. Why would I use this versus you know, the Citrix solution?
That's a great question. And so with regards to Edge Site and others, Edge Site, for example, one of the things that our customers tell us about very often is that you can't monitor just XenApp itself or just XenDesktop by itself. You've got to be able to monitor this infrastructure underneath it, and we provide you that visibility, that ability to do so. We actually had a use case to go a little bit further, more specifically, with users that had problems that were taking place around the logs that were getting, or logs or the errors that were taking place, and their systems were crashing, and they didn't have enough data to actually provide and analyze what's going on. Very simply because Edge Site wasn't a real-time monitoring system. It brought great visibility, great data and statistics, but they couldn't actually do things in real time. This enables you to actually monitor real time and actually see all of that information, not just for XenApp, but also its underlying architecture. And the other side of it is, it's great if you have, it's important to have a good monitoring tool, but if you can't use it, that becomes very difficult. And a lot of customers tell us that it can be challenging to use that Edge Site, and when it becomes challenging to use the technology, you're less likely to use it. And so that's why with Simplify Monitoring, we're trying to make it as easy as possible to get access to the data you want to, make it point and click, make it so you don't have to go and figure things out yourself, and have us help you along the way to accomplish that for you. And so a lot of our customers find that ease of use factor very important because they end up leveraging the tool more then. So they actually have the ability to get the answers they need.
Makes sense. Makes sense. We have a couple more questions, but I know you have more demo to show. So let's jump back in the demo, and then I'll save these next two for you know, for after that piece of demo. Sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. Absolutely. So, Doug, we had another use case with a user where you know, it's important to not just be able to see, you know, what the session latency things are like that, but a lot of problems were taking place for them at startup, at shutdown. They had PVS. I mentioned a little briefly just a couple seconds ago. But one of the key things they need to be able to do is to find out what was going on when these systems were crashing, or what was happening when a user's session was getting stuck. Well, with Simplify Monitor, we had the ability of the built-in log management capability in that same tiny little agent. And so what Simplify Monitoring has the ability to do is in real time analyze those event logs for problems that are transpiring. So we'll identify those conditions during the startup phase, during whenever problems were taking place, bring that data back immediately into Simplify Monitor so we can see what's going on. So if you come to our other main dashboard, it's a quick heat map display that we have here. Breaks down the hosts, the VMs, the storage. And so from here, we can actually go to a server and say we had a user that called up saying they're running into a problem. And say they're on XenApp or they're on XenDesktop now. And so you went over to the XenDesktop session and you saw, okay, well, first of all, there's some unregistered conditions taking place. We'll get into that in just a little bit and what we can do there. But you wanted to find out, well, what was the user signing into? And so we'll go back again for the last month real quickly here, and we'll pick on, another one of our users. We'll pull back the different records for what that user was doing. We'll see, okay, well, that user was signing into this VDI session. If I come back over to the main dashboard here, I can track back to see, okay, well, what was going on in that VDI session that stopped that user from signing on, or conditions that were taking place. And so when we click on the actual VDI session here, we can get a quick indication of all the conditions that are transpiring, all the events that are taking place that are going to prevent them from actually signing into it, executing something, any issues that could be occurring out there as well. And so it's going to parse those event logs in real time and tell us about those different events. And so what we saw with this customer case is that we'd see the actual user sign on, the group policy would get fail to apply, and so we'd actually indicate here the failure of that actual of the group policy to apply, the actual name of it, and then we'd actually see the crash dump take place. So the whole failure sequence was actually iterated out, starting with the timestamps, and it was logged there, and you can see at at 3:01 we saw the group policy get applied. At 3:02 group policy failed, and then at 3:04 we saw the crash dump notification, and then we saw a reboot sequence occurred. All that information shows up right away inside of Simplify Monitoring. You're not going to have that information, if it was on PBS, because it would be gone. But we have it here so you can actually dig into it. And so we can actually provide that information, that visibility right back to you. Another important thing is that you don't want to have to be in a situation where you have to always go to the screen to actually find out what's going on when you're not looking at Simplify Monitoring. Well, for that reason, we have a series of pre-configured monitoring rules. What actually drives the display you're seeing here, these red and yellow icons, is those monitoring rules. So the monitoring rules that we have set up for Simplify Monitoring are looking at all the necessary conditions around XenApp and XenDesktop that are necessary in order to gain the visibility that you need to. You don't have to go and figure out what needs to be monitored. We've already done that for you. We've already brought in the IMA service, the Prince Pooler service, all the different components in and around Citrix XenApp and XenDesktop that you need in order to make sure that stays up and running. And so these monitoring rules are looking out for these different conditions. They'll even get down to the application layer. So for example, if you have a process that's running out there that's running into certain conditions and issues, we'll actually identify that for you. A common one that takes place is high CPU utilization by Internet Explorer. I was talking to a large telecom company earlier today. This is a common issue that they run into. They have this running out there. It's going to end up chewing up a full core. And so what we actually do is we'll actually notify you for any application out of the box if it's running for longer than 2 minutes and for greater than 50% of CPU utilization. So you get indicated to that taking place. This is specifically important, for example, in the case of like the print spooler. They'll often get stuck in jobs. We know that at Tricerat, of course, because of our printing software, but it's especially important from a monitoring perspective, too, because what we'll actually be able to do is tell you, okay, the print spooler went down. Now, one of the cool things we can do at that point in time is say, okay, we've seen it hit that threshold of, say, 95% of utilization, and we can modify this, too. It's really simple. And we can say, you know what, I don't want you just to let me know about that. I want you to terminate it. In the case of the print spooler, we'll actually want you to go and do one more action. And so what Simplify Monitoring can do is not just let us know that the print spooler crashing and kill it. We can actually go and take one more action here and execute a script to actually clear the print queue away. So the print queue is cleared. The whole sequence is taken care of for you. You got notified that the print spooler was running hot, that it was killed, and the print queue was cleared. That's great, right? Well, we'll take it one step further and also clear out and actually restart the print spooler service. So it'll work in tandem with the built-in monitoring rule that we have to get the print spooler back up and running and get it restarted. So let you restart that print spooler service on there, and you're set to go. Your users might have had a blip of an issue. You can even have it send a message from here, too. Again, running a quick script to say, net message, print spooler was restarted. Please retry your print jobs. And everyone gets back to printing, and hopefully you've kept the calls to the help desk at 0 or maybe 1 or 2 tops instead of 100 calls coming in at the same time.
You got it.
That type of remediation sequence is really important to staying proactive and ahead of the conditions that are taking place.
Love it.
And Steve, and Doug, one thing that was brought up a little bit earlier was being alerted and notified. And we saw just a few moments ago that my VDI sessions, they're actually coming back unregistered. Well, if we come back to the actual dashboard itself, we actually have the ability to actually notify and let you know about that. So when we click on this condition, you can see real fast that we were alerting to the fact that the state was unregistered. Well, not only can we tell you and report back to you and say, hey, you've got 10 VDI sessions unregistered, well, we can do take it one step further. There's a built-in monitoring rule that will actually be able to, you can actually customize and adjust. It's actually predefined, to be honest. So you don't have to do anything at all. But what this monitoring rule will do, I'll just bring up a new one so I can show you, is on the case of a VDI session being unregistered, we can go and actually reboot that for you. So let you go and restart that actual VDI session, have it come back registered, ready to go, accept incoming connections. For the XenApp server side, for that matter, too, we can set thresholds at 10,000, server load of 10,000, and then execute a remediation action to turn off logons so you don't have any other users trying to sign into it, or maybe do that when it hits 9,000 or 9,500. Or if it hits 20,000, you've got some serious issues going on, we'll alert you to that, too. So it's really helpful in staying ahead of the curve and finding out what's going on, automating some fix actions, patching some issues so your users can get back to work while you're working on at a much more calm and level pace as to actually fixing the overall issue that's impacting it.
That's great.
Yep. Doug, any questions about that? I was going to dive a little bit more into some of those remediation sequences, some of the ways that we can actually help some of the end users actually fix problems out there in their environment too.
Yeah, I do. I do have a few more questions, but go ahead with your demo real quick, and then we'll jump into these last remaining questions.
Okay, absolutely. So a couple more things that are taking place. Now, all the different monitoring rules that we saw, when we come back to the dashboard, this is actually being driven by our concept of groups. So we'll actually automatically populate and break down all the different systems that are out there by desktop group for XenDesktop, for example, if you want us to, by farm if that's the way you want to organize it. You can do it by location. And so you can see at a high level what the health of the entire environment is. And this actually drives all the other screens. So you can see from one quick view what the health of the environment of your different environments are. Is there an issue taking place with one of your desktop groups? And so then you can just select just those objects that you want to monitor. We'll grab a couple of these, and then go right over to see what those events are that are taking place. Then you can actually click on them, see those conditions that are occurring out there, see what events that are happening. And if you've got, for example, like a high ICA latency condition that's taking place, they'll tell you who the user is, which connection it was that was taking place that was affecting it. At the same time, what a lot of our customers are doing, and I know some of you out there that have PVS are doing reboots of your XenApp servers. Well, what some of our customers are doing is they're actually taking a much more tactical approach to it. So one of the things they're actually having Simplify Monitoring do is actually look for the drive cache to hit a certain threshold. So we have a built-in monitoring rule here. It's actually going to be looking at the drive space utilization. So this will look, and it'll indicate when, say, drive space gets down to 1.5 gigs. Well, and then what we can do, as I mentioned before, is reboot that server, clear out that cache. Now, you don't want that happening in the middle of the day, so they just very simply come back over here and actually have it suppress the monitoring so it only takes place between, say, 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, one of their maintenance windows. And then not only that, but they'll have it reboot the system. And before it does that, they'll have it execute a script that actually executes a clean log off of everything, broadcasting a message saying system's going down for reboot. So that people, if anyone's on there burning the midnight oil, they don't get mad. They get a notice indicating it's happening. The system reboots nice and clean, and it comes back with a nice free and clear cache, and you're ready to go for the next day. Really important to make sure you stay on top of these different conditions, and we'll be able to pull all that data back together and present and provide that visibility to you.
That's cool.
Doug, I know we only have about 5 or so minutes left, or maybe a little bit longer than that, but if you wanted to ask a couple questions.
Yeah, please, if you don't mind.
Sure.
These are from the guys out there, so it's important. Is it possible to monitor some modifications on system by administrator as a registry, for example, a registry modification or a system stop? And I think he showed that just now.
Yeah, actually there is. So there's a place where we can actually define like a registry key. I think that's what they were asking for, Doug. We can actually define a registry key here and define that path. set it to be monitored, and if it gets changed or something happens to it, we can alert you to it. Absolutely.
Very cool. Very cool. I've yet to hear you say no. I love it.
I
Is
have a
it?
feeling, Doug, you're going to ask me a tough question next, so I'm going to reserve that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I shouldn't say that, should I? Okay. Is it possible to launch some benchmarks from this tool?
So to launch benchmarks. So one of the things that we will do is we can trend out for you and report on performance over time. So there's a whole series of built-in monitoring reports that we have out there. One of the cool things is that when we add in these reports, it actually also adds in, so if you went to, say, back to the performance graphs here and you built a really cool chart, say, for example, and you were tracking, say, SQL utilization, we can actually build that chart in here and then it'll build a report as well to actually add in all those different layers. So, for example, let's say you wanted to see the true memory utilization inside of SQL. You know, that's one of the challenges our customers always have. How is it possible to see how much free memory is actually there? Because you've got to virtualize, so it's provisioning some of that memory, and then SQL's going and caching all of it. Well, what we can do is pull in those metrics, pull it into a chart here, and let me actually swing right down to SQL here. See the actual true free memory availability inside of SQL, and then right inside that memory manager. And then when that happens, we can actually have a report that becomes available that I can go and actually execute against and trend out. And that will give us our max, min, and averages over that period of time, giving us those statistics and values that you would need to know. So those are going to show up right inside of here. I can schedule that off, and then you can actually have those statistics for baselines and performance for any metric. Even the basic ones like CPU memory utilization, those are built in, and they'll come back and actually report that data out to you. A lot of customers use that for setting up alerts and thresholds for notifications.
Cool. Okay, I like this question. This is a good one. What is the impact on performance from adding a large number of monitoring rules?
That's a great question. So one of our largest customers is a payroll company out of the UK, and in their hosting environment, they probably have upwards of like 200 to 250 conditions that they're actually monitoring for on each of their servers. And actually, I've kind of got that simulated in our environment too. So actually, I'll show you in real time. So our XenApp sessions, within one of our XenApp sessions, I've got this system looking for about, I don't know, about 200 different conditions and aspects on that's running on here right now. I've got all the monitoring rules applied to it, a lot of them taking place and instantly alerting back data on a persistent basis every couple of seconds, because I'm basically looking for every single event log that's passing through it. So to kind of get an idea what the load is on that system where I have that taking place, let me just sort this by name. And if I go down to it, here's the agent. It's at 0.19% of CPU utilization. So it's pretty lightweight.
Very cool. Can these report into System Center Manager tasks that may have, boy, my reading is horrible. Tasks that may have been taken into certain failures. How are these tasks monitored on failures?
So just to make sure I understood, we're talking about taking the events that we're finding in Simplify Monitoring and passing those tasks back onto System Center. And how would that be manifested?
Yes.
Okay. So the way that happens is, the way that we do it right now, very simply, if you see an event that takes place inside of Simplify Monitoring, I'll go to a specific condition. I think I actually have this set up here. Bear with me for a second. Is what it will do is it'll take that event that took place. I don't have it on here. So, but what I'll explain how it works. So, say for example, we found that the IMA service had failed, right? Unknown condition, it was trying to connect to the database, went to the other event triggers that take place with it, and said, okay, here's the this event that took place. Well, this rule that's looking for these conditions, this error that told us about the logon failure, the authentication failed, what it will do is it'll package this up, and the way that we do it at System Center is we actually do it through syslog actually. So it'll take this information, it'll pass it back up to System Center, and then we set up filters and views inside of System Center, and it'll show that information represented there, showing the actual errors per server, what the actual full event that was that took place. And so it'll say up there, XenApp server failure And then when you select it and you look at the details, it'll have all this content inside of it showing up and represented. It's worth noting, Doug, that what we're going to have in the next iteration of that, we're actually evolving some of our integrations, and specifically with SCOM, we're going to have we're actually growing that to have a full management pack that can be deployed out there that not just takes the errors and events and conditions that we're seeing here and passes it up and aligns with anything that we're seeing on the System Center side, but it'll actually bring over some of the visualizations to pull over the ability to actually interact with Simplify Monitoring in a more bi-directional methodology. That's something that we're excited about getting out there. We're going to have that in this coming year.
That's cool. That is cool. Okay, does remediation require your agent to be installed on the VM?
It does require agent to be installed on the VM. It requires the agent to be installed from where the action is taking place. And so what I mean by that is you could choose, for example, and so some of our customers have done this. They've actually had it go and execute that action from the Simplify Monitor server, and they wrote a script that maybe queried something or passed something that through the WMI service. They did a little bit more there on their own to actually trigger that type of action to do it agentlessly. But for us, everything has to be, an agent has to be present where the action is taking place.
Cool. I have two more simple questions for you, and I know it's the top of the hour, but we have two more. So can you monitor NetApp CIF filters, for example?
That's a great question. I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to that, Doug, to be dead honest. We do have the ability to get some details about the condition and any failures that are taking place around them. We also have the ability to monitor like fiber channel interfaces and then the speed of the interfaces on those the NetApp storage. But in terms of filter conditions, I'd have to find out and get back to you.
Cool. That wasn't a no, though.
Yeah, I know we have customers that have NetApp that are using Simplify Monitor to look for conditions and failures and get alerted to those conditions. So if it's a condition that the NetApp device is finding and its tool that it has, its native tool is actually identifying, we can get those same messages into Simplify Monitor, and we use syslog to do it. But if it's not seeing it, then unfortunately we can't monitor that just yet. It's something that we have visibility into.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, and the very last question is a question we asked you earlier, and it's a perfect end question too. The gentleman writes, I don't understand the cost information on the host. I don't remember him giving a cost per host. Did I hear $400 per XenApp server? So can you go through licensing real quick again, what it costs?
Sure. So in terms of the actual hosts themselves, and bear with me for a second here, Doug, because technically I'm on the technical side of things. I usually leave this up to Steve.
Well, that's what I always say is I'm an engineer. I don't know what things cost.
Exactly. So, Steve, if you're on, if you want to chime in, feel free to do so. If not, bear with me for just a quick second. In terms of the cost,
Steve, I'm on here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the question was. Yeah, I was just taking a nap while you did your wonderful demo. No, I'm just kidding. that was a great demo, though, Raj. Seriously, I appreciate that. You really did a great job.
You did a great job, and that was actually a question, or they put in the question, great demo, thank you. So kudos to multiple people.
Yeah, Rogers does a great job. And great questions, too. The licensing was really about the host, and that's $400 per host for the API integration.
If the gentleman's still on that asked the question, please, if you can, add on to that. But what he wrote, Steve, was, I didn't understand the cost information on the host. I don't remember him giving a cost per host. So I guess the question is, what is the cost per XenApp server?
Right. So the XenApp server is a $400 charge for a physical or a virtual XenApp server.
Okay.
So that would be $400. And then the API integration into the host, whether that's Xen server or ESX, that's $400 as well for that host integration.
Cool.
License. And what we like to do, Doug, is once we work with a client specifically, we walk through a real quick inventory of what elements that they have in the supporting infrastructure that they're interested in licensing. We just type the numbers in, create a PDF, and send it out. So it's a real quick way Like I said, that's one of the advantages that we've gone to market with, is a very competitive price. You could find that we're a half, sometimes a third of a competitive solution. So we do that right up front. It's nothing that we're putting on the background. So if someone wants to get more details and price, can just email me. We can do a quick conversation and get the results for that too.
Perfect. Yeah, there were a couple other statements, questions about licensing, so I'll just throw it at them. Please reach out to Steve, and I bet they'll probably reach out to you. So, if you have questions about licensing, that's always one of those things that, depends, right? So talk to them, and they'll get you the answer. One guy did have one more question relating to, that answer and all. API, what does that mean?
I can take this one, Steve. So API means
sure?
we have a you know what, if you want to.
No, I'm kidding.
So what we mean by API is, very simply, it's a purpose-built integration. So VMware and Xen Server and XenApp and XenDesktop, there's no standard way of querying for their specific statistics and metrics and counters and values of how it's performing. You have to use their language for all intents and purposes. So we built a purpose-built integration into XenApp and XenDesktop, so we can ask for XenApp and XenDesktop conditions, like what's the ICA protocol doing, or what's the session load, or in the case of VMware, where it's got all that different memory provisioning and disk performance statistics that everyone really wants to know about, we can ask it and find out and show you what's going on in terms of storage performance or performance on that host. So we can show you different things like the different provisioning levels. This helps you get a better visibility as to what's going on and true statistics as to what's going on. Especially in the case of, like, say, CPU utilization, a lot of people want to know, well, what's the CPU utilization really, because it's being virtualized. Well, you can get that. We can get that for you because we have an API integration into VMware and Xen Server to show you those specific statistics.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, I think that's about we're definitely a little bit over time, and that's okay with me. And but I definitely enjoyed it, Raja. That was an absolutely wonderful demo, and we got a lot of kudos from the audience on through the questions piece. But I think I'll throw the kudos back at the audience for asking wonderful questions. These webinars that I put on really succeed because of the audience and great presenters like Raja and Steve. So I thank each and every one of you guys. It was a great, I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and I'm pretty darn impressed with what you guys have put together too. So this is neat stuff. A last question, if somebody wants to learn more, what do they need to do?
Yeah, I think right now the best way is just to send me an email. It's swalman@tricerat.com. You can always visit our website at www.tricerat.com. There's a lot of information there on the website as well as links to contact us, get more information, schedule a demo, attend one of our new upcoming webinars as well.
You bet it. I'm going to put this in, we're recording this. Hopefully the recording works. I've had a little bit of trouble recently with GoToWebinar, so I'm scared to death at this moment. But hopefully it works, and we'll get this out to you, and you can share this with your bosses, your friends, your coworkers, what have you. We have a couple more questions, but we're out of time. I think their questions are same. If they're questions, we'll get back to you via email, but we're going to go ahead and call this a webinar. So, guys, I'll give you the last word, and I'll just say thanks to everybody.
Yeah, thanks everyone for attending. I really appreciate it, Doug. Again, a wonderful job, and thank you for coordinating this demo today.
Well, thank you. Okay, thanks everyone. With this, that's our webinar. Take care and have a great rest of the week, and happy holiday, Merry Christmas, and all that jazz.